The letter arrived on a Tuesday, the same day of the week Eleanor had passed. It was thick, the kind of paper that had a trust fund. It felt heavy in my hand, heavy with the self-importance of the person who sent it. I did not need to see the signature to know who was behind it. The scent gave her away. A faint, chemically sweet perfume that clung to the fibers of the envelope like a toxic mist. Brenda van der Zee. I slid it open with the utility knife I kept on my workbench, the one I used for stripping coaxial cable. The blade was clean, sharp, precise. The letter was not. It was a jumble of legalese spaghetti, cooked up by the HOA's discount lawyer, but the message was brutally simple. My grain tower, the one that had stood on this property for nearly a century, the one Eleanor had called our lighthouse, had been declared a structure of community nuisance by unanimous vote. I was ordered to have it demolished, at my own expense, within 30 days. Failure to comply, the letter purred in its condescending font, would result in fines of $500 a day, a lien on my property, and further legal action to enforce the board's non-negotiable decision. 30 days. I looked out the workshop window, past the organized chaos of my soldering station and oscilloscopes, to the tower. It stood silhouetted against the bruised purple of the evening sky. It was elegant in its utilitarianism, a monument of weathered steel and faded red paint, solid, honest, and true. Eleanor and I had bought this 5-acre plot specifically because of it. We were young engineers, in love with structures that did a job, that had a purpose. When she got sick, she would sit in the garden she'd planted at its base and watch the hawks that nested at its peak. After she was gone, I kept the garden alive. I kept the tower maintained. It was my anchor to her. And Brenda van der Zee, a woman whose primary contribution to the world was complaining about the precise shade of beige her neighbors painted their mailboxes, was going to tear it down. A rage began to build in me. It was not a hot, explosive rage. That kind is inefficient. It burns fuel too quickly and leaves you with nothing but ash. No, this was a different kind of anger. It was the quiet, methodical fury of an engineer who has just watched a perfectly designed system be smashed by a fool with a hammer. It was a cold fury, the kind that settles deep in your bones, a low-frequency hum of absolute certainty. It was a problem to be solved. A system failure cascade to be analyzed, traced to its root cause and rectified. Permanently. Brenda had just made a catastrophic miscalculation. She saw a quiet old man, a widower who kept to himself, a retired telecom engineer. She saw an easy target. She had no earthly idea of the kind of man who spends 40 years designing and troubleshooting continent-spanning fiber optic networks. She didn't understand that my entire professional life had been dedicated to finding the single, critical point of failure in a complex system and exploiting it. And she, Brenda van der Zee, was a very, very complex system of vanity, greed, and breathtaking arrogance. I folded the letter, making a crease as sharp as a razor, and placed it on my workbench. I went to the old oak file cabinet in the corner, the one filled with schematics and decades of project files. I pulled out a fresh, leather-bound notebook and a newly sharpened Dixon Ticonderoga pencil. On the first page, in neat block letters, I wrote, Project Brenda. This was not going to be a fight. Fights are messy and unpredictable. This was going to be a systems analysis, a teardown. My name is Arthur Pendleton. I am 63 years old, and for most of my life, I designed the invisible architecture that holds the modern world together. The networks that carry your calls, your data, your secrets. I speak in protocols, bandwidth, and signal-to-noise ratios. I live in a world of quiet logic. My house is paid for. My needs are simple. Black coffee, the smell of pine sap from the woods behind my property, and the quiet hum of my workshop. Since Eleanor passed, peace was the only thing I had left to acquire. The preserve at Meadow Creek was not, in fact, a preserve. It was a sprawling subdivision of McMansions that had metastasized around my small farm over the last 15 years. I had refused to sell to the developers, so they simply built around me, leaving my 5 acres as an island of old-growth trees and authentic history in a sea of sod lawns and identical beige houses. When they established the Homeowners Association, my property was grandfathered in, exempt from most of their petty tyrannies due to its pre-existing status. Or so I thought. Brenda van der Zee had moved in about 5 years ago. Her husband, a perpetually defeated-looking man named Gary, who seemed to have the personality of a damp sponge, had made a fortune in medical supply logistics. Brenda's full-time job was serving as the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood. She drove a white Range Rover the size of a small tank, her face a frozen mask of Botox and disdain. She communicated in a language of passive-aggressive emails and thinly veiled threats. Her voice had the grating frequency of a failing modem. Everything about her was synthetic, from her acrylic nails that went click, click, click on every surface she touched, to the industrial-strength perfume that announced her presence from 50 feet away. She hated my grain tower from the moment she saw it. It blocked the sunset from her new, ostentatious sunroom. It was rustic, she'd sneered at me once, using the word like it was a communicable disease. It didn't fit her vision of curated, sterile perfection. For years, she had tried to find leverage. She'd sent letters about the length of my grass, the state of my fence, the color of my workshop's trim. Each time I had calmly sent back a copy of the legal agreement that established my property's exemption. Each time, it had infuriated her further. She was a creature of control, and I was the one variable she could not regulate. This latest move, declaring the tower a nuisance, was a direct escalation. It was a flanking maneuver, an attempt to bypass the property exemptions by declaring it a danger to the community. It was clever, in a brutish, unsubtle way. But it was also sloppy. It was an emotional decision, born of arrogance, and emotional decisions always leave behind a trail of exploitable data. My investigation began not with lawyers, but with fundamentals. The first section of my notebook was labeled System Parameters. I needed to define the operational environment. I spent the first 2 days reading every single word of the HOA's covenants, conditions, and restrictions. It was 150 pages of the most mind-numbing prose imaginable, a monument to petty tyranny. I highlighted every clause, every subsection, every definition. I cross-referenced amendments. I drank a gallon of black coffee and digested it all. I was searching for the system's internal contradictions, the programming bugs in its legal code. Next, I went to the county records office. I spent an entire day pulling every deed, survey, and easement related to my property and the surrounding subdivision, going back 100 years. The clerks, bless them, were accustomed to dealing with frantic homeowners. They seemed surprised by my quiet, methodical approach. I wasn't angry. I was compiling. I scanned every document onto a thumb drive. Thousands of pages of history. Somewhere in that mountain of data was a weapon. I just had to find it. While the bureaucratic gears turned, I began physical reconnaissance. Brenda's escalation was a change in tactics, and I needed to understand why. What had changed? I set up a small, weatherproofed security camera with a powerful zoom lens mounting it discreetly on the side of my workshop, pointed not at her house, but at the street in front of it. I wasn't interested in her privacy. I was interested in her patterns. Logistics. In my world, you can learn everything you need to know by watching the traffic. The log entries in my notebook began to fill up. 8:15, white Range Rover departs. 10:30, Amazon Prime van, 6 packages. 11 o'clock, commercial landscaping truck, crew of 4. 12:15, dry cleaning delivery. 14:40, a large, unmarked white box truck arrives. Driver unloads 10 large cardboard boxes. No company logo. Interesting. 16:50, white Range Rover returns. Day after day, the pattern was the same. A steady stream of deliveries, far more than typical for a residential home. The unmarked trucks were the most curious. They were a deviation, an anomaly in the data stream. I ran the license plates. They were registered to a shell corporation, which was in turn registered to a P.O. box, a dead end for now. My nearest neighbor was a man named George, a retired accountant who had lived here for 20 years, a quiet widower like myself. Brenda had forced him to tear out a beautiful, prize-winning rose garden because the particular shade of red clashed with the community's color palette. He'd been defeated by her, but he was also a man who noticed things. An accountant sees the small details that do not add up. I invited him over for coffee one morning. I didn't mention Brenda's letter. I just asked him how he was doing. We talked about our gardens, our late wives, the quiet pains of a house that is too big for one person. Then I casually asked about the traffic on our street. "It's the trucks," he said, his voice low. "Been getting worse the last 6 months, especially at her place." He pointed with his chin toward the Van der Zee fortress. "She's running some kind of business out of there. My Eleanor, she used to sell a few knitted scarves on the internet. Brenda found out and had her shut down in a week. Cited the no home-based business clause. Said it was attracting commercial traffic. The hypocrisy is breathtaking." I just nodded and poured him more coffee. "What kind of business?" "Some kind of lifestyle brand. Brenda's Best, or something equally nauseating. Sells overpriced candles and throw pillows to women who have too much money and not enough sense. She films videos in her new sunroom." He paused, a flicker of anger in his tired eyes. "The sunroom with the perfect view of the sunset. Once your tower is gone." The pieces began to click into place. A systems engineer calls this fault isolation. I had motive, I had a pattern of behavior, and I had a clear violation of the very rules she was using as a cudgel against me. It was good, it was leverage, but it wasn't the kill shot. Tattling on her business would be a skirmish, not a war. I needed something more fundamental, something that would not just defeat her, but dismantle her. The next phase of the project required me to reactivate a part of my old life. I made a call to a man named Marcus, a former protege of mine who was now a senior executive at one of the country's largest telecommunications companies. We hadn't spoken in years, but in our line of work, you build bonds that are stronger than casual friendship. They are forged in the crucible of 3 a.m. network outages and billion-dollar infrastructure projects. "Arthur, to what do I owe the honor? Did you finally decide to come out of retirement and show us how it's done?" His voice boomed over the phone. "Not exactly, Marcus. I need a favor, an archaeology expedition." I explained my situation, omitting the HOA drama and framing it as a simple property records query. I gave him the GPS coordinates of my grain tower. "I need to know if your company or any of its predecessors ever had any equipment on or near that structure." I'm talking legacy stuff. 20, 30 years ago. Legacy? Arthur, that's ancient history. We've overlaid that area with 5G nodes and fiber. Anything that old would have been decommissioned decades ago. Humor me, I said. Check the old master site files, the ones they probably keep on microfiche in a sub-basement somewhere. He grumbled, but he agreed. For you, Arthur, I'll go digging. Don't expect much. While I waited for Marcus to work his magic, I continued my own archaeology. I went back to the mountain of documents from the county. This time I wasn't looking for deeds or surveys. I was looking for something smaller. Utility easements, service agreements, the boring boilerplate stuff that everyone ignores. I spent 2 solid days, my eyes burning from the old, digitized records on the library's microfilm reader, my fingers gray with toner dust. Page after page, nothing. And then, I found it. It was a Tuesday afternoon, exactly 2 weeks after Brenda's letter had arrived. The discovery wasn't a dramatic thunderclap. It was a quiet click, the sound of a final tumbler falling into place in a complex lock. The document was an easement agreement from 1998 between the farm's previous owner and a long-defunct cellular company called OmniWave. OmniWave had been bought by another company, which was then acquired by a larger one, and eventually absorbed by the very telecom giant Marcus worked for. The agreement granted OmniWave the right to install and maintain telecommunications signal augmentation equipment on the grain tower. In exchange for a modest annual lease payment, they had mounted what the contract called a passive repeater array and a small microcell signal initiator. My breath caught in my chest. I knew exactly what that was. It was old technology, a clever workaround from the early days of cellular networks. Before they could build massive, ugly cell towers everywhere, they used existing tall structures. A passive repeater is essentially a giant, precisely angled set of antennas. It's a mirror for radio waves. It gathers a weak signal from a distant, powerful tower, focuses it, and bounces it down into a localized area. The microcell initiator was a low-power transmitter that filled in the gaps. It was an elegant, low-cost solution for covering a dead zone, and it was almost certainly still active. The telecom companies, for all their talk of 5G and fiber, are notoriously lazy about decommissioning old, functional equipment. If it's not broken and not costing them much, they'll leave it in place. It becomes part of the network's invisible foundation, a legacy system that new technologies are built upon without anyone ever questioning the original bedrock. My heart began to beat with a slow, powerful rhythm. A beautiful, exquisite hypothesis was forming in my mind. The new Preserve at Meadow Creek subdivision, with all its smart homes, streaming services, and constant connectivity, had been built in a natural geographic bowl, a signal dead zone. The developers probably never even realized it, because the service had always been fine. They had no idea that the only reason their precious subdivision had any reliable cell service at all was because of the rustic old grain tower they all despised. My tower wasn't just an anchor for my memories. It was the anchor for their entire digital existence. I packed up my things, my mind racing, calculating. I had to be sure. A hypothesis, no matter how elegant, is useless without empirical data. When I got back to my workshop, there was an email from Marcus. The subject line was a single word: wow. The body of the email was short. Arthur, you're not going to believe this. That old tower is still in the master site file. It's designated as a critical passive repeater site. Site ID 734-B. It's bouncing the primary signal from the main tower on Red Mountain down into the Meadow Creek Valley. According to the network topology maps, every single one of the small 5G nodes in that subdivision is fed by the signal originating from your structure. They're daisy-chained off it. If Site 734-B goes dark, the entire grid collapses, the whole valley goes dead. No calls, no data, nothing. We have a team scheduled for a maintenance check there in 3 months. Why in God's name are you asking about a relic like this? I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile spreading across my face. The feeling was pure, unadulterated intellectual satisfaction. It was the moment an engineer realizes the flaw in the system is not just a flaw, but a feature they can exploit. Brenda van der Zee was not just threatening to tear down my wife's memorial. She was threatening to bomb her own neighborhood back into the technological Stone Age, and she had absolutely no idea. This was it. This was the kill shot. This was the legal and technical nuclear bomb I had been looking for. The beautiful, perfect, exquisite discovery. I opened the Project Brenda notebook and turned to a fresh page. At the top, I wrote, Phase 2, Weaponization. The first step was to move from theory to proof. I spent the next 3 days conducting a comprehensive signal survey. I pulled out my old spectrum analyzer and a directional antenna from a dusty case in the workshop. It felt good to have the old tools in my hands again. I was back in my element. I built a detailed, color-coded map of the entire subdivision. I walked every street, taking readings every 50 feet. The signal propagation was exactly as the old topology maps suggested. A strong, clean signal emanated from my tower, creating a perfect coverage umbrella over the whole valley. I marked the location of every 5G small cell node I could find, disguised on light poles and utility boxes. They were all positioned with a perfect line of sight back to my tower. They were like baby birds, waiting with open mouths to be fed the signal from the mother nest. Then, I focused on Brenda's house. I stood on the edge of my property, which bordered her ridiculously manicured back lawn, and I took detailed readings. 5 bars of 5G ultra-wideband. Her entire house was a testament to the signal's strength. I could see the Wi-Fi router blinking in her sunroom window, her smart sprinkler system, her multiple Ring cameras, the Tesla charging in her driveway. All of it, every last bit of her curated, connected life, was utterly dependent on the structure she wanted to turn into scrap metal. The data was irrefutable. I compiled it all into a clean, professional report, complete with charts, graphs, and propagation maps. It looked like something I would have presented to a board of directors to justify a $10 million network upgrade. It was dense, technical, and absolutely terrifying if you understood the implications. The next phase was legal fortification. I contacted my niece, a sharp, ruthless corporate lawyer in the city. I didn't want a local attorney who might be intimidated by the HOA. I wanted a shark. I sent her the entire package: Brenda's letter, the HOA bylaws, the easement from 1998, the email from Marcus, and my signal survey report. Her response came less than an hour later. Uncle Art, it began. This is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. Do not do anything. Do not speak to them. Just sit tight. I'm drafting the letters now. We are going to own them. While she forged the legal swords, I began to engineer the psychological warfare. My goal was not just to win. It was to make Brenda the architect of her own humiliation. I needed her to double down. I needed her to escalate, to become so consumed by her victory that she couldn't see the cliff edge she was sprinting toward. I hired a local survey crew to come out and restake the property lines around the base of the tower. I had them use bright orange flags and wooden stakes. It was completely unnecessary, but it created an immediate buzz of activity. The neighbors started whispering. Was he preparing for demolition? Then, I rented a small cherry picker. I spent a whole Saturday up in the basket, wearing a hard hat and a high-visibility vest, tinkering with the antenna array at the top of the tower. I wasn't actually doing anything, just cleaning some connections and taking measurements with a multimeter. But from the ground, it looked incredibly official. I could feel Brenda's eyes on me from her sunroom window. The uncertainty had to be eating her alive. Was I complying? Was I reinforcing it? Her simple, brutish plan was suddenly complicated by variables she couldn't control. The 30-day deadline was approaching. The fines would start in 1 week. The pressure was building. This was the moment to set the final trap. I drafted a letter. Not from a lawyer, from me. It was polite, conciliatory, and utterly disingenuous. I wrote that I had been exploring my options regarding the grain tower and that I wished to find an amicable solution for the benefit of the entire community. I formally requested, as per Section 8, subsection C of the HOA bylaws, a special open meeting with the full board and all interested residents to present my findings and a proposed resolution. I hand-delivered it to her mailbox. It was the act of a man who was beaten, who was coming to the table to beg for scraps. It was designed to appeal to her most profound weakness, her ego. The idea of me, the stubborn old man, publicly capitulating before her and the entire neighborhood would be irresistible. She took the bait. Of course she did. 2 days later, a notice was posted on the community bulletin board. A special meeting of the Preserve at Meadow Creek HOA would be held the following Thursday evening. The sole agenda item, final resolution of the nuisance structure at 212 Old Farm Road. The stage was set. The actors were in place. The system was primed for a catastrophic, beautiful failure. The night of the meeting, the community clubhouse was packed. It seemed every resident of the Preserve at Meadow Creek was there. They smelled of new money and quiet resentment. Brenda had made sure to whip up attendance, eager to have a large audience for her triumph. She sat at the head of a long table flanked by her board of sycophants, a collection of spineless yes-men who owed their positions to her patronage. She was wearing a blood-red pantsuit, and she looked like a hawk who had just spotted a field mouse. Smug did not even begin to describe the expression on her face. Her husband, Gary, sat in the front row, looking ashen. George, my neighbor, gave me a small, worried nod from the back. I was dressed simply, in a clean work shirt and jeans. I carried a laptop and a small, powerful projector. I was the picture of the humble petitioner. Brenda called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of a gavel that was entirely for show. Her voice dripped with condescension. As you all know, we are here tonight to address the ongoing issue of Mr. Pendleton's unsightly and unsafe grain tower. After careful consideration and a unanimous vote by your board, we have ordered its removal. Mr. Pendleton has requested this meeting to, as I understand it, make a final appeal. Mr. Pendleton, the floor is yours. She gestured dismissively toward the podium and leaned back in her chair, a cruel little smile playing on her lips. Click, click, click went her acrylic nails on the tabletop. I walked to the podium and set up my laptop. I didn't look at her. I looked at the assembled homeowners. Good evening, I began, my voice calm and even. Thank you all for coming. My name is Arthur Pendleton. I know most of you see me as the quiet old man who lives on the farm that time forgot. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the room. And you're not wrong. I like my peace. I like my quiet. But I also like facts. I like data, and I believe in making informed decisions. For the past 28 days, I have been conducting a thorough systems analysis of the issue at hand. I am here tonight to present my findings. I clicked the remote and the projector hummed to life. The first slide was a simple, high-resolution satellite image of the entire subdivision. "This is our community," I said. "Beautiful, secluded, and from a telecommunications perspective, located in a significant topographical dead zone." I clicked again. A new slide appeared, a geological map showing the valley. "We live in a bowl. High-frequency radio waves, like the ones used for cellular data, travel in straight lines. Without a clear line of sight to a major transmission tower, this entire area would have virtually no reliable service." A murmur went through the crowd. People were starting to frown, looking down at the phones in their hands, which all showed a healthy set of bars. Brenda shifted in her seat, her smile tightening. "Mr. Pendleton, this is all very fascinating, but I fail to see the relevance." "Oh, I assure you, it is eminently relevant," I said, without looking at her. I clicked to the next slide. It was a picture of my grain tower, with a series of complex technical diagrams overlaid on it. "This is what you call a nuisance structure. What my colleagues at AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile call Site ID 734-B. It is a critical passive repeater and microcell transmission site. It has been in continuous operation since 1998. I let that sink in for a moment. The room was silent. "To put it in simple terms," I continued, "this tower is a giant, carefully aimed mirror. It catches the signal from the main tower on Red Mountain and bounces it down into this valley. The small 5G nodes you see on the light poles, they are all fed by this primary signal. This tower, this eyesore, is the sole reason anyone in this room has reliable cell phone service or high-speed data." I clicked to the next slide. It was my signal propagation map, a beautiful, terrifying bloom of color centered directly on my property. Red for the strongest signal, fading to blue and then black in the signal shadow that would be created if the tower were removed. The entire preserve at Meadow Creek was in the black zone. "This," I said, pointing to the map, "is what our community looks like with the tower. And this," I clicked, and the color vanished, leaving only black, "is what it looks like without it. No calls, no internet, no streaming movies, no Ring cameras, no smart home functions." I paused and looked directly at Brenda for the first time. No online businesses. Her face had gone from smug to confused to pale. The click, click, click of her nails had stopped. Which brings me to my next point. The next slide was a compilation of security camera footage from the street in front of her house. Time-stamped videos of the unmarked box trucks. A zoom-in on shipping labels. A screenshot of her Brenda's Best website. According to Section 14, subsection G of the HOA bylaws, no residence shall be used for commercial or business purposes that result in increased commercial traffic. The bylaw you, Madam President, have used to shut down at least 3 small home businesses run by your neighbors. Gasps erupted around the room. George was staring at Brenda, his mouth hanging open. Brenda shot to her feet. "This is an outrage. My personal life is not on trial here. This is about a dangerous, dilapidated structure." "Dangerous," I replied, my voice still level. "I'm glad you brought that up." I clicked again. The new slide was a scan of the 1998 easement agreement. I had highlighted the relevant passage. "The grantee shall have the right of free and unimpeded access to the equipment for maintenance and repair and the grantor shall not interfere with or permit the interference of the structure housing said equipment. This is a legally binding contract, currently held by a consortium of the 3 largest telecommunications companies in North America. Tearing down that tower is not just a violation of the easement, it is a federal crime under the Telecommunications Act of 1996. It's called willful destruction of critical communications infrastructure. The fines start in the millions, and that's before the civil lawsuits. The color drained completely from the faces of the board members. They were looking at Brenda not as their leader, but as the person who had just led them off a cliff. This is a lie," Brenda shrieked, her voice cracking. "You're making this up. You forged these documents." "Am I?" I said calmly, and right on cue, the doors at the back of the clubhouse opened. 2 people walked in, a woman in a razor-sharp business suit and a man with the unmistakable air of a federal agent. The woman spoke, her voice filling the stunned silence. "Brenda Vanderzee? I'm Eleanor Shaw, lead counsel for Bell Atlantic Wireless. We've just been made aware of your board's intent to destroy our property at Site 734-B. Consider this your formal service of an emergency federal injunction. If a single one of your demolition contractors sets foot on Mr. Pendleton's property, we will sue you, the board, and the HOA as a whole into insolvency." The man stepped forward and held up his credentials. "Ma'am, I'm with the FCLA's Enforcement Bureau. We've opened a formal investigation into this matter, as well as allegations of illegal business operations in violation of local ordinances and federal tax statutes. We'll have a few questions for you." Brenda stared at them, her composure shattering like cheap glass. Her carefully constructed world of control and intimidation had just been dismantled, piece by piece, with cold, hard data. She turned on me, her face a contorted mask of pure hatred. "You!" she screamed, her voice a raw, ragged thing. "You did this! You planned this! I will ruin you!" She lunged toward the podium, but her husband, Gary, galvanized into action for the first time in what seemed like a decade, grabbed her arm. "Brenda, stop! It's over!" he pleaded. She whirled on him. "It's not over! Don't you tell me it's over, you useless man!" It was a complete and total meltdown. A systems crash in real time. The homeowners were backing away from her, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning satisfaction. They were recording it all on their phones that worked for now thanks to my tower. I just stood at the podium and watched. I took a sip of water. My work was done. The system had been rectified. The aftermath was, in a word, total. Brenda's reign was over. The video of her public meltdown went viral within the community. The HOA board, facing a barrage of lawsuits from the telecom companies and a federal investigation, immediately resigned. Brenda was impeached in absentia. The FCC fines for her illegal business and the telecom harassment complaint were astronomical. They had to sell the McMansion with the perfect sunset view to pay the first wave of legal fees. I heard they moved to another state, deeply in debt and socially radioactive. Gary filed for divorce. The new chastened HOA board, led by my neighbor George, approached me with a formal written apology and a settlement offer so generous it made my eyes water. My niece had done her job well. They begged me not to sue them personally. I accepted. But the victory wasn't just about the money or the humiliation of a bully. It was about what came next. I used a significant portion of the settlement to buy the overgrown, neglected half-acre plot next to the clubhouse, the one Brenda had always wanted to turn into a private parking lot for her Range Rover. With the help of George and a few other neighbors, we turned it into the Eleanor Pendleton Memorial Park. We planted a community garden, installed a small playground for the neighborhood kids, and put in benches that faced west toward the sunset. The telecom consortium, grateful that I had saved them millions in infrastructure damage, offered me a new, far more lucrative lease agreement for the tower. They also paid to have it refurbished, stripped down to the bare metal, reinforced, and given a fresh coat of deep crimson paint. It looks better than ever. It still stands there, tall and proud against the sky. A monument. Most people see it and just see an old grain tower. They have no idea that it's the silent, steady heart that keeps their modern world beating, but I know. It's a memorial to my wife, yes, but it's also a monument to the quiet power of knowing how things work. A reminder that you should never, ever underestimate the quiet old man in the workshop. He just might be the engineer who designed the system you're trying to break, and he will always know exactly where the off switch is.